Tonight is not like other nights. Tonight bears a weight, a mystery, a sign, for the calendar of man passes day to day, but the calendar of God holds moments of appointment, moments of shaking, moments of unveiling. And September 3rd is not to be dismissed as an ordinary turning of the clock, but as a watch night, a night in which heaven speaks, a night in which destiny is closer than it seems. For the scriptures declare that God does nothing without first revealing his secrets to his servants, the prophets. And when he marks a time, when he marks a day, it is for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. What happens tonight carries the shadow of what has been and the foreshadowing of what is yet to come. For the patterns of the ancient days are converging with the present. The appointed times of Israel, the prophetic alignments of the heavens, the warnings written in the rise and fall of nations, all converge upon moments such as this. Look to the watchmen on the walls, for they sound the trumpet not to entertain, but to warn. And when the trumpet sounds, it means danger is near, but it also means deliverance is at hand. September 3rd is a night when the trumpet is sounded. It is a night that bears both warning and hope. It is a night that says the hour is late, that the nations tremble, that the foundations shake, and yet that the God who reigns is calling his people to awaken. Do not think it coincidence that this night comes in the season of turning, the season when the trumpet of God is prepared to sound. The Feast of Trumpets approaches, the day when the ancient priests would lift up the shofar and declare the opening of the gates of heaven. And what is the Feast of Trumpets but the foreshadow of the great day when the final trumpet will sound, when the dead will be raised, and when the King will return? So tonight becomes a watch, a rehearsal, a warning. The shaking of the earth, the turbulence of nations, the signs in the skies. These are not random. They are harbingers. They are alarms from eternity. For just as in the days of Noah the people lived, ate, and slept, yet the ark was being prepared and the flood drew near, so now the world sleeps as the hour approaches. Tonight is no ordinary night because we stand on the threshold of eternity. Therefore, watch. Watch as the ancient pattern unfolds. Watch as the signs align. Watch as the world stands at the precipice. For the clock of man may strike midnight, but the clock of God is striking eternity. Tonight is not ordinary because heaven is nearer than you realize, judgment is closer than you imagine, and redemption is at the door. September 3rd is not to be seen as a mere passing of another date upon the calendar of man, for the calendar of man is filled with ordinary days. But in the calendar of God, there are days of significance, days when time intersects with eternity, when the natural collides with the supernatural, when what is hidden is brought to light. This night is one of those nights that must be discerned, for it bears the mark of divine appointment. In the ancient scriptures, it is written that God appointed times and seasons, that he set apart holy convocations and moedim, appointed moments when his people were to assemble, to hear, to turn, to prepare. September 3rd is not written in the traditions of man as a day of significance, but in the prophetic patterns it stands as a signpost, a marker, a reminder that not every night is the same. Just as Passover was a night unlike any other night, when judgment passed through the land, and yet salvation was revealed, just as the night of the Exodus marked the departure of God's people from bondage into freedom, just as the night of the Messiah's birth changed the course of human history, and just as the night he was betrayed began the pathway to the cross, so too there are nights appointed in every generation that carry weight beyond what the world perceives. The world looks upon September 3rd and sees the ordinary, yet heaven looks upon it and sees a convergence. For there is a rhythm to God's time, a heartbeat to his calendar, and every beat draws his people closer to the appointed hour. The prophets spoke of days of shaking, days when nations would reel like drunkards, when the earth itself would groan as in the pains of labor, and when the heavens would declare signs to those who are awake. To most it is invisible, but to those who seek and watch, the veil is thinner, the mystery is unveiled, and the warnings are discerned. It is not by accident that such a night comes in the season of turning, the days that lead to the trumpet blasts, the days of preparation and awakening. For this night is a reminder that God marks his times and reveals them not to the careless or indifferent, but to the watchful and the faithful. The weight of this night is not in human celebration or worldly recognition, but in what it signifies in the realm of the Spirit. It is a night that bears witness to the urgency of the hour, the lateness of the time, and the nearness of eternity. For just as the children of Israel were called to keep watch on the night of Passover, just as the disciples were commanded to stay awake in Gethsemane, so too are the watchmen of this generation called to see that September 3rd is not ordinary, that it is a time of alignment, of warning, of calling, a time when God's people are summoned to be awake and to discern the signs that others pass by without recognition. The trumpet of warning and hope is sounding, and it is not the trumpet of man, but the trumpet of heaven. In ancient times, the sound of the shofar was never casual. It was not blown for entertainment or for empty ritual, but for moments of utmost importance. The trumpet would sound to gather the people, to call them to battle, to warn them of danger, to proclaim the beginning of sacred days, and to prepare them for the presence of God. The blast of the trumpet was a voice that pierced through the noise of the world, a sound that awakened sleepers and shook the hearts of those who had grown complacent. In the same way, the trumpet is now sounding in the Spirit, declaring that the time is late, that the hour is urgent, and that the people of God must not slumber but awaken to what is at hand. The trumpet of warning tells us that danger is near. Just as the watchmen of Israel would stand upon the walls of the city and lift the shofar when an enemy approached, so now the trumpet is sounding over the nations, declaring that judgment is looming, that the foundations of the world are shaking, that the powers of darkness are moving, and that the day of reckoning draws closer. The shaking of economies, the turmoil of governments, the wars and rumors of wars, the storms in nature, and the signs in the heavens are all trumpets in themselves, sounding alarms that most refuse to hear. But the voice of the trumpet calls those who belong to God not to be blind to the times, not to be lulled into the sleep of the age, but to be as the wise virgins who trimmed their lamps and remained watchful for the coming of the bridegroom. Yet the trumpet is not only of warning, it is also of hope. The same sound that warned of an approaching enemy was also the sound that called the people to gather in the presence of the Lord. The trumpet sounded at Sinai when the mountain shook with fire and God descended in glory. The trumpet sounded to proclaim liberty throughout the land in the Jubilee year, releasing the captives and restoring what was lost. And the trumpet will sound again at the end of the age, when the dead will be raised incorruptible, when the faithful will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, and when the King returns to reign over all nations. So the sound that warns also promises, the blast that awakens also comforts, the voice that shakes also assures. The trumpet resounds across September nights such as this, declaring both the urgency of turning and the assurance of redemption. It tells us that judgment is near, but it also tells us that salvation is at the door. It pierces the veil between the ordinary and the eternal, calling the people of God to tremble and rejoice, to weep and to hope, to prepare and to lift their eyes toward the coming of the Lord. This night foreshadows the coming Feast of Trumpets and the day of the Lord. For the appointed times of God are not relics of an ancient people, but living mysteries, rehearsals of what is to come. The Feast of Trumpets, known in Hebrew as Yom Teruah, the day of the blasting, was appointed by God as a holy convocation, a day marked by the sounding of the shofar. On that day, the priests would lift the ram's horn and let its sound break the silence, calling the people to awaken, to prepare, to repent, and to look toward the coming judgment and mercy of the Almighty. It was the day that began the 10 days of awe, leading to the great day of atonement, a time of reckoning, of repentance, of standing before the judge of heaven and earth. And yet it was more than a day of ritual. It was a prophetic shadow of what is to come at the end of the age, when the final trumpet will sound and eternity will be unveiled. To understand this night, one must understand that every feast of the Lord was not only a remembrance of what had happened, but a prophecy of what would happen. Passover foretold the Lamb of God who would be slain for the sins of the world. The Feast of First Fruits pointed to the resurrection of Messiah as the first fruits of those who sleep. Pentecost foreshadowed the outpouring of the Spirit and the birth of the church. And so the Feast of Trumpets remains as the appointed time yet to be fulfilled, the day that points to the resurrection, the rapture, the return of the King, and the opening of the gates of eternity. Thus, a night such as this, standing at the threshold of that appointed feast, becomes a sign, a rehearsal, a reminder of the hour that is drawing near. The shofar blasts of the Feast of Trumpets were meant to shake a sleeping people, to turn their hearts back to God before the great and terrible day of atonement. In the same way, The prophetic foreshadowing declares that this is the season of turning, the season of awakening, the season to prepare, for the greater day of the Lord is approaching. That day is described by the prophets as a day of darkness and not light, a day when the sun will be darkened and the moon turned to blood, a day when the heavens will be shaken and the earth will tremble, a day when every man will stand before the judgment seat of God. And yet it is also the day of redemption, the day when the faithful will be gathered, when the bridegroom comes for his bride, when the trumpet of God will sound louder than all the noise of this world. Thus, September 3rd becomes not an ordinary night, but a prophetic marker pointing toward that great fulfillment. It is as if the calendar of heaven is whispering to the earth, reminding those who have ears to hear that the appointed time is nearer than when we first believed, that the trumpet is about to sound, and that the day of the Lord will come swiftly like a thief in the night. The signs in the nations, the earth, and the heavens are converging as harbingers, for the voice of God is not confined to words written on scrolls, but resounds through the very fabric of creation. The prophets declared that before great and terrible days, there would be signs, warnings sent forth, so that none could say they had not been forewarned. In the nations there is upheaval, kingdoms rise and fall, rulers are shaken from their thrones, alliances crumble, and new powers emerge. Wars break forth in one land and spread like fire to another. Unrest grows in streets, and the foundations of governments tremble. These are not random movements of history, but the outworking of what was long foretold, that in the last days nations would rage, kingdoms would be shaken, and peace would be taken from the earth. The earth itself joins in the testimony. Storms grow stronger, fires spread across lands. The ground quakes beneath cities, and waters overflow their boundaries. Creation groans as in the pains of childbirth, longing for redemption, bearing witness to the corruption of sin and the lateness of the hour. What once was rare becomes frequent. What once was local becomes global. And the shaking of the natural world mirrors the shaking in the spiritual realm. The plagues of Egypt were not only judgments, but also signs, harbingers of what was to come if Pharaoh hardened his heart. And in the same way, the upheavals of our age are warnings to a world that has turned away from its maker. The heavens too declare their signs. The sun darkens, the moon turns to blood, and rare alignments of stars and planets draw the gaze of those who watch the sky. Eclipses cross the lands at appointed times. Blood moons fall on the sacred days of the biblical calendar. Comets streak across the heavens, and the constellations mark the seasons with precision. The psalmist declared that the heavens are the work of God's hands, proclaiming knowledge to every land, and in these days their proclamation grows louder, bearing witness to the approach of the appointed hour. When ancient Babylon fell, there were omens in the skies. When empires shifted, the heavens marked the moment. And when the Messiah was born, a star appeared in the east to lead the way. So too now, the heavens align with the word of prophecy, declaring that history is not adrift, that there is a hand guiding all things to their fulfillment. The convergence of these signs is itself a sign. Each by itself might be dismissed as coincidence, but together they form a chorus, a trumpet blast across creation. The nations in turmoil, the earth shaking, the heavens proclaiming, all testify that the days of complacency are over, that the time is urgent, and that the world stands at the edge of something greater than itself, something foretold, something inevitable, something that will reveal the glory and the judgment of the Lord. The world slumbers, but eternity draws near, for humanity walks as if time is endless, as if tomorrow is guaranteed, as if the days will always continue as they have since the beginning. Men chase after gain, women pursue vanity, nations contend for power, and people fill their lives with distractions, unaware that the hourglass of history is nearly empty. It was the same in the days of Noah, when the people ate, drank, built, planted, and married, and yet the flood came suddenly and swept them all away. It was the same in the days of Lot, when the city bustled with commerce, laughter, and indulgence, and yet fire fell from the heavens in a moment they never expected. The greatest danger is not in the signs that appear, but in the blindness of those who refuse to see, the deafness of those who will not hear, the hardness of those who resist the call to awaken. Eternity is not far off. It is closer than the breath in your lungs, nearer than the beating of your heart. One heartbeat separates time from eternity. One breath separates the earthly from the everlasting. One moment separates the temporal from the eternal. The prophets cried out that the day of the Lord would come as a thief in the night. Not because it was hidden to those who watched, because the world chose to remain asleep. The trumpet may sound, the heavens may shake, the nations may tremble, but to the slumbering soul, it will be as if nothing has changed until it is too late. Sleep blinds the eyes to the urgency of the moment, and spiritual sleep blinds the soul to the reality of eternity. Yet even as the world slumbers, eternity presses closer with every passing day. The signs multiply, the warnings grow louder, the convergences become clearer, and still the masses continue in their distractions, their pleasures, their endless pursuits. They store up treasures that moth and rust will destroy. They labor for crowns that will perish. They seek after kingdoms that will crumble, all the while ignoring the kingdom that will have no end. The greatest tragedy is not that eternity is coming, but that so many live as if it never will. The lateness of the hour demands awakening. If the watchman sees the sword coming and does not sound the trumpet, the people perish in their sleep. But if the trumpet sounds and the people still choose to slumber, then their fate is sealed by their own refusal. The world may remain asleep, but the children of light are not called to sleep as others do. They are called to watch, to discern, to awaken, to live not for the fleeting moment, but for the eternal day that is approaching. The world slumbers under the illusion of permanence, but eternity is already at the threshold. The veil between time and forever is thinner than ever, and the footsteps of the coming day are already echoing in the midnight hour.